Welcome everyone to this very special learning opportunity with Rachel Danziger. We're very grateful to the Chernans for sponsoring this class, which is in memory of Gita Chernan, Zichrono Livracha. My name is Zoe Lang, and I'm the director of Mayan, and it's wonderful to see so many of you here today to participate in this very special opportunity to learn. So what I'd like to do to get us started, Mark Chernan is going to say a few words about his mother. Then we'll be turning it over to Rachel. There is a source sheet for today. I will put it in the chat so that you have access to that. And I will now turn it over to Mark so we can hear a few words from him.
Thank you. My mom, Gita Chernan, Gita Rasa Bat Rafael Bamalka, lived to the age of 93. During her lifetime, she earned both bachelor and master's degrees in education from the University of Arizona and had a career of about 30 years as an early primary grade educator in public schools in Tucson and Scottsdale. She was involved in Jewish education as well through Al Kabira for many years and was active in starting new synagogues in the Phoenix area. In her assisted living community in Mission Viejo, California, she taught classes in Jewish history and literature. Mom took her own progress in Jewish learning seriously, with the result that she mastered the brachot, some laning, and a haftorah, so that she could become a bat mitzvah at the age of 84. In view of all this, it is most fitting to commemorate Mom with today's Jewish learning event, especially one featuring an outstanding female Jewish educator, Rachel Sharansky Danziger, as our speaker. So take it away, Rachel.
Thank you so much. I'm very moved that you gave me the opportunity to speak in your mother's memory, especially hearing about her more from you. And as you will see, as the class progresses, the topic of learning throughout your life and growing throughout your life will be oddly relevant to the topic on hand. So I feel it is very, very appropriate. So thank you. And thank you, Zoe, for organizing this. And thank you, everybody, for being. And without further ado, let us go in. I'll just point out that I see that Zoe Long shared the source sheet in the chat if you want to open it there, but I will also share screen as is relevant as I speak. So I know that in America, we're still 2 Shabbatot away from Korach. Here in Israel, we're reading Korach this week. So it's an odd, there's this odd falling out of sync with each other in the reading that's also relevant for the topic today, which is I called falling out of time. And it really focuses on a particular midrash. I want to focus on a particular midrash that has to do with the sons of Korach. But before we can get to the particular midrash, who are these sons of Korach? Who are we even talking about? Why are the sons of Korach relevant concepts or people that we should be interested in? And the answer is that the sons of Korach pose somewhat of a biblical mystery. We all know what happened to Korach, right? We know that Korach stood up against Moshe and more specifically Aaron's leadership. And as a result, because he and the people he brought with him posed such a chutzpahtic challenge to Moshe's leadership, Moshe ended up saying that it's not going to be enough to just punish them. God's punishment is going to come in the form of a proof that God will punish them in a way that never has been seen before. And that the newness of this creation, the newness of this method will be the thing that convinces everybody that what's happening here is not 2 political leaders having it out with each other, but rather only one political leader being backed by God and the people challenging him. So far, I mean, it sounds as straightforward as something like that can ever sound, which I admit is not much, not very straightforward, but pretty clear, right? Everybody that is with Korach is going to suffer. Everybody that's with Korach is going to die. And in fact, when you read the description in the Parsha, you guys will be reading next week, and I will be, well, I'm actually going to be in America this week, but the people in Israel will be reading this week. it seems as if that's exactly what happened, that all of Korach's family died. I'm here in box 2 in the source sheet. I'm actually not going to read the whole text. I'm just going to read from verse 31, Lamed Aleph. Scarcely had he finished speaking, and this is Moshe making the speech that says that if they're going to die in an unusual way, swallowed by the ground, you will know that God is with me. Scarcely has he finished speaking all these words when the ground under them burst asunder, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households, all Korach's people and all their possessions. Now, before we continue with the question of who are the sons of Korach, I just want to draw your attention to one separate point, something I owe a debt of gratitude to Rabbanit Aviva Zornberg for pointing out in her book about numbers, namely that there's this interplay in the story of the earth swallowing these people on the functions of a mouth. Moshe is speaking. In fact, in Parashat Korach, he speaks a lot. He keeps trying to negotiate some sort of compromise, to convince the people who support Korach to back up. He keeps trying to use the tool of speech to find a path forward. And he keeps being rebuffed at every turn. So instead, the function of the mouth that is to eat, to swallow, to consume comes into play. Of course, it's not his mouth, it's the mouth of the earth. It literally says that the earth opened its mouth. But there's this beautiful interplay here when, as he's speaking and he's running out of words, he's finishing the words. In the place where there's no more words that can do any good, the earth opens itself up and death, violence, consuming step onto this stage. A very powerful statement about the value of speech and how important it is to use speech well and to heed speech well. Because what happens when there's no more speech is always violence. A point we will come back to, but for now, let us continue sleuthing here together regarding the sons of Korach. So here it sounds pretty straightforward, right? All of Korach's people and all their possession, the homes, everything goes down and is lost in the earth. Judging by that, when we talk about sons of Korach, there shouldn't be any sons of Korach, right? Sons of Korach are dead. Except that later in the book of Numbers, in the census scene at the end, when we suddenly remember who are the people, we revisit who are the people that are about to enter the land, we hear the following. I'm still in box 2. The sons of Eliav were Nemuel and Datan and Aviram. These are the same Datan and Aviram chosen in the assembly who agitated against Moses and Aaron as part of Korach's band when they agitated against God, whereupon the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with Korach. When that band died, when the fire consumed the 250 men, and they became an example. And now, almost as an aside, we hear the following. The sons of Korach, however, did not die. How can that be? We watched them swallowed up. We watched Korach and his men and all their households being swallowed up to the point of totality that the midrash goes beyond that and says that even, let's say, if one of those families lent out some possession to another family, the lent out possessions rolled into the earth so that nothing of those households will remain. Their removal from the midst of the people had to be so total to prove the point. And yet, how come the sons of Korach didn't die? Now, in the midrash, or in the commentary rather, there's 2 distinct approaches to this question. One is more pshat, or like more, I would say, realistic, doesn't look for miracles where you don't need to. And one is much more mystical. Let us start with a more straightforward, simple reading. Sforno, trying to explain the expression here in box 2 in the source of our parsha, right? The parsha we're discussing, where it says, Et kol adam, all Korach's people were swallowed, says the following. Kol adam asher leKorach, all the people who had made common cause with Korach in this rebellion. Seeing that this is the meaning of these words, we need not be surprised to be told that Korach's son did not die, as they did not belong to their father spiritually or philosophically. Now, it's not pshat, right? It still needs to kind of read the words a little bit cleverly, because normally we would say kol adam shel koach, meaning all his kin, everybody who's of his blood. But he says, no. It's all the people who made common cause with it, belonged to his cause. So his sons who didn't believe in it, who looked at their father's cause and said, we don't want to have anything to do with it, also had nothing to do with the punishment. Interestingly, Rashi chooses the drush mystical approach, following Gemara and Sanhedrin. And he says the following: but the sons of Korach did not die. They were in the plot originally, but at the moment when the rebellion broke out, they had thoughts of repentance in their heart. Therefore, a high spot was fenced around for them in Gehenom, in hell, and they stayed there. This is a remarkable story. If you would go to the Gemara and Sanhedrin, it's more detailed. It has this whole visual effects description of there's hell and it's a place of unbearable heat, Gehenom, and Korach and all his people are being swallowed up. And these people are screaming out, these three sons of Korach are screaming out, Moshe emet v'torato emet. Moshe is telling the truth and the Torah is truth. So it's not that God plucks them out and lets them stay amongst the other people. No. But he halts them. They're in the process of falling down, and God, it's almost like, sounds like a special effects in a movie a little bit, in today's movies. There's a piece of ground goes up from hell, and they can reside on that, hanging in that weird place that's not in our world, not above ground, but is also not all the way down where Korach and the other agitators are, in a place of total destruction, devastation, heat. Yeah. Now, the midrash in Sanhedrin goes on to say that Korach and his men also didn't fully disappear, that God brings them out to testify to Moshe's truth closer to earth from time to time. But we're going to leave that midrash alone and focus on these three sons of Korach that either didn't make common cause with their father and therefore were spared the whole thing, or in the mystical reading are there in Gehenom. And here comes, we kind of resolve the first step in the mystery, but here comes a second step in the mystery, and also the part where the midrash I promised you comes in. Because the sons of Korach don't disappear from history at this point. They keep popping up. In Chronicles, we keep meeting them in descriptions of the chronology and the genealogy of the Levites. We see them particularly in their role as the guardians of the gate. There's a particular gate to Beit HaMikdash that they're responsible to serve next to guard, to sing next to, etc. In fact, according to the Chronicles, these sons of Korach, down the line, father one of the greatest people in our history, Shmuel HaNavi. Shmuel HaNavi is a descendant of these sons of Korach, which of course complicates a lot the question of, wait, if they're still stuck in Gehenom or in that jutting piece of dirt that came up in Gehenom, what are they doing fathering children amidst the Israelites? Another uncomfortable situation. More than that, they have quite a few psalms that are attributed to them. Mizmor lebnei Korach. Asaph is also a descendant of Bnei Korach, so Mizmor leAsaph. All those psalms that are attributed to these people need to be explained. And once again, the Parshanim go different directions. Some say it's their descendants, those who say that they were just spared because they didn't sin. Some say that eventually God brought them out of Gehenom because they made tshuva, and then they had children, and their children are the one who sing those psalms. And some midrashim say that they themselves sing those psalms, partly in Gehenom. In Gehenom, they're singing these psalms, or on the day when they're brought out. And it's in the nexus of this option, this particular explanation, that imagines these psalms as something that stems out of people's experience of utter devastation, of being locked in limbo, neither dead nor alive, neither up in the world nor down consumed by the fires of Gehenom, whatever that means. somehow in the nexus of this explanation where the Psalms come from this experience, very peculiar and interesting image emerges in the midrash. Let us look at it together in box number 1. The midrash here is actually not even in the Gemara. It's mentioned in the Tosfot on the Gemara. And it's trying to explain, and I'm not going to read the whole psalm here, but it's trying to explain the beginning of this psalm. The beginning of the psalm is Mizmor le'asaf, right? A psalm of Asaf. Ba'u go'im benachalatecha, heathens have entered your domain. Timu et eichal kodshecha, defiled your holy temple. Samu et Yerushalayim le'im, and turned Jerusalem into ruins. A very powerful description of the destruction of the temple. But why is it prefaced with the word mizmor? The word mizmor means a song of joy. If you think about it, that other famous psalm of exile, Al neharot Bavel sham yashavnu gam bachinu, right? On the rivers of Babylon we sat and cried. It doesn't say mizmor leBavel, right? It doesn't say, let's call it a jaunty song about destruction. So Chazal and the Gemara and the Tosfot all ask, why is it a mizmor? Now, they come with several simpler explanations. I'm going to skip those and jump straight to the midrashic explanation. There is a midrash, I'm still in box 1 in the bottom, that Asaph said song because the gates sank into the ground. Let us put it in context. Asaph is a son of Korach. He is from the family of Korach. He either is in Gehenom suffering or above wondering about his ancestors who are suffering. Let's go with the option that he is in Gehenom suffering. And suddenly, into his special outcrop of ground in Gehenom, sink the gates of the temple. The assumption here is that when the temple is destroyed, the gates are not simply broken and gone. Somehow they're preserved. They're preserved much like the sons of Korach are preserved. The sons of Korach are preserved in this limbo and this state of being alive, yet not in the living world. And the gates are coming down to join them. And when Asaph sees that, he sings a song of joy. Why? Now, the Tosfot offer this image, this metaphor to explain it. It is compared to a maidservant who went to draw water from the well and whose pitcher fell into the well. She became distraught and began to cry until the king's maidservant came to draw water carrying a golden pitcher, and it too fell into the well. Now, I'll interpose and say that when a golden pitcher falls in, you can count on the fact that somebody will come and dive into the well and dig it out, because you're not going to leave a pitcher of gold in a well. That's stupid. And therefore, at which point the first maidservant began to sing. Till now, she exclaimed, I didn't think that anybody would retrieve my cheap earthenware pitcher from the well. But now, whoever retrieves the golden pitcher will retrieve mine as well. In other words, the son of Korach are standing there in their limbo state, and they have no knowledge if God ever intends to pull them out, or if this is just their punishment to exist forever in this limbo state, which in a sense, I want to add, reflects something about their indecision, right? They didn't commit one way or another. They didn't commit to Moses and they didn't commit to Korach. They committed to Korach until things went bad. And they said, no, actually we were with Moshe. So they're put in their punishment in a sense is very much fits the sin. They were not fully committed one way or another. So they're not fully existing in one or other way. They're not gone on to the next world, however we understand it. And they're not in our world of living people. They're just stuck. And they have no hope. They don't know if God intends to pull them out one day, if they do enough tshuva or not. Yet when they see the gates of God's home, they say, wait a minute, somebody's going to retrieve these gates. God is not going to let these gates, the gates of his own home, rot here forever. So if he retrieves that, he might as well retrieve us. And maybe we can think about this moment of destruction, that the temple is destroyed, with joy, not because destruction is good, but because we assume that this destruction is reversible. And therefore our state is reversible. Or in the word of the Tosfot, in the same way, when the sons of Korach who were swallowed up inside the earth saw how the gates of the temple sunk into the ground, they proclaimed, whoever rescues the gate will also rescue us. That explains why Asaph, who was from the family of Korach, said Mizmor, a joyous song. Let us dwell for a second with this image. I recognize that it's midrash, I recognize that it's not a pshat reading, and yet Chazal, when they're gifting us this image, are gifting us a very powerful tool or inspiration to thinking about the story of Korach. Let us dwell in it for a second. We have the sons of Korach and their weird in-between limbo state. And we have the gates in their weird in-between limbo states. Because what are gates? What is the function of a gate? Please unmute yourself and just speak up. What is the function of a gate?
Whoever from one space into another.
Right, to lead between space and another. The whole function of a gate is that you open it and you go somewhere. Sometimes you close it. Sometimes the function of a gate is to defend, but these are presumably open gates. Just
It's also to protect. It's also to protect. It's to protect you. If you're inside the gate, you're protected.
Right. So normally a gate is either open and then the function is to allow passage, or closed and then it affords protection. When these gates are standing in Gehenom, they're neither protecting anyone nor leading anywhere, because the space that should be protected or walked from or into doesn't exist. You see it sometimes in archaeological digs. I've been in an archaeological site here up in Israel's Galilee, an ancient shul from 500 ED. Not that ancient by Israeli standards. And what's interesting is that all that's left of the shul is the doorstep and a few of the stones and columns that stood right next to it, right? So you go there and you see this passage, but you don't know where is the inside and where is the outside. It's just a doorstep without a clearly defined space on one side of it. How are you supposed to know which way is in and which way is out? It doesn't mean anything. As somebody wrote in the chat, a defined space is liminal. So here are these gates and they're perfect. They're preserved perfectly. Their shape is perfect. Their function is gone. So they're also in this weird in-between state. And the sons of Korach in their in-between state, where they can't quite live, but they can't quite die, are standing there with these gates that fell out of the place and time that gave them context and usefulness. And they rejoice in being in this in-between state together because they assume that redemption will come. That if the function of life for the sons of Korach and opening or protecting, allowing people through or protecting a space for the gates will be restored to them. And they sing a song that marks their state of mind as one of anticipation, of being aware that the reality right now is not the end all, that there's something beyond that. I want you to note this anticipation because we will come back to what anticipation means at the end of the class when we tie it all together. For now, I want to continue though in the path we started and ask, how can this midrash help us understand the story of Korach? What does it add? After all, Chazal don't just make up stories. Something about this midrash is supposed to draw our attention to something in the story of Korach. And the question is, what? Do you have any ideas, any thoughts you want to share? Anybody? I can't see everybody, so feel free to unmute yourself and just speak up if you have something you want to say. At any point, really. Okay, so for now, I'll continue and say the following. The story of Korach on the surface is a straightforward political challenge. There's a question of leadership. We know, we the readers who see God telling Moses and Aaron what to do at every stage, we know that their leadership is not based on their own ambition. It's based on God's decree. But not everybody in the camp of Israel is convinced of that, and there's various challenges against them. But on a deeper level, if we start digging into the motivations and ideas behind the agitation, behind people going out of their way to pose such a challenge to Moses and Aaron, and as we know, to God, stand a set of ideas or motivations that have some truth to them, that have some validity to them. They're just misplaced, much like the gates of the temple. They're solid. They should serve, but they're out of place. They can't be used at this particular moment when they're in that weird limbo, gray zone over Gehenna. So there are several ideas and motivations in the story of Korach that are kind of like that. There's validity to them, there's value to them, but they're not in the right moment in time to be used. Let us look at it in the text. Perhaps I'm actually going to skip a little bit ahead. I'm going to skip to box 5 in page 4. Let us start with the actual argument Korach brings forth. I'm in the second source, okay, Numbers 16. Now Korach, son of Itzhar, son of Kohat, son of Levi, Kehat, betook himself along with Datan and Abiram, sons of Eliav, and On, son of Pelet, descendants of Reuven, etc., etc. They combined, and it's interesting, in Hebrew it says Vayikahalu, which means they crowded, and it's a word that appears in very particular places in Torah, often to describe mob behavior. For example, when the people crowd on Aaron, telling him, this man Moshe disappeared, make us a new god, and he makes for them the golden calf, it also says Vayikahalu. So Vayikahalu, they mobbed or crowded against Moshe and Aaron and said to them, you have gone too far. In Hebrew, it's rav lachem, too much for you. For all the community are holy, all of them. Kol ha'edah kulam kedoshim, and Hashem is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourself above God's congregation? Now, in the context of this particular rebellion, this is a very cynical thing to say, because it's pretty clear from what follows, namely that Moshe tells them, okay, if you think you should be the lead priest, you come before God with a machta, with a pan and incest on it, and God will choose the person who's worthy of bringing it before him, and the others will burn to death. It becomes clear that each one of those people is interested in being number one. They think that they should be number one. And Rashi goes in and says that Korach was a prominent man in himself in the Levite families. And he said, why should Moshe and Aaron, who are both one branch of the Levite tribe, get all the honors, all the sources of authority, and us, the other families of Levite, shouldn't? So in other words, what they wanted was more power to themselves. And cynically, the argument they're using is everybody's equal, everybody's holy, why should you be holier than us? So it's clearly cynical. It's clearly not something that they mean fully. Yet the idea in and of itself, the idea that everybody is holy and everybody should serve God, and that really on some deep level, distinctions between people within the Jewish nations and creating a class that's supposedly closer to God are problematic, is rooted in something very, very true. It's rooted in the mission God gave us as a people when in Exodus 19, but you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel. That's God talking to Moshe. Now, when God told Moshe to tell the people that you will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, this was meant to be a revolution, the likes of which the world has never seen before. Because Moshe was supposed to take this message into a world where the word of the king defines good and evil. If the king says throw babies in the river, you can feel okay with yourself doing that because the king is the one who sets the standards. And if the king says so, then you do it because that's what there is. He's speaking to a world where the priests, and I mean the priests of Egypt in particular, we know that from the story of Joseph in Genesis, are protected from the vicissitudes of time and power, unlike the rest of the people. Paro, on some level, owns all the lands of Egypt, except the lands of the priests. In other words, to be a priest in Egypt is to be part of a class that's protected, that's valued, and that's forms of a formally created elite, meaning not just an elite of meritocracy, an elite that's by blood, passed on by blood. Your status as a member of an elite is passed on by blood. And it has such clear and distinct advantages that no one can ever say, oh, everybody's equal. No, there's no equality at all. And into this world of one man exploiting another, the world that later in Shirat Hayam, the people will describe with the word sus verochvo, horse and his rider, and the Mefarshim will derive from that this beautiful poetic image that this was the essence of Egypt. The essence of Egypt was that it's all about hierarchy, it's all about power, about one person having power over another. And into this world comes Moshe, the shepherd, with his stick and his severe countenance, and says, no, we're going not only to take these people out of Egypt, we're not going to only break the power of Paro in this particular instance. We're going to create an alternative to the entire power structure that Paro represents. We're going to create an alternative to everything Egypt stands for. And this is what Moshe keeps telling us, right, in the Torah. Remember you were slaves in Egypt, Moshe and God. You remember you were slaves in Egypt. Don't act like the Egyptians. Take care of the stranger in your midst. Take care of the widow and the orphan. Take care of your slaves. Don't be like Egypt. Forever and ever, remember, you're supposed to be the alternative to Egypt. When you have a king, and we'll come back to the issue of kingship in a little bit. When you have a king, the number one thing that he needs to be is someone who doesn't have a lot of horses, because horses come from Egypt. So he shouldn't be someone who's in trade with Egypt. And he must not take you back to Egypt, and you must never go back to Egypt. And in the Parsha you will be reading this week, when the Meraglim say, we want to go back to Egypt, that is a thing that heralds death for them, because regression into Egypt, whether physical or metaphorical, becoming Egypt, is the thing that the Torah is supposed to stop us from doing. And the alternative is that we're all of value. We're all equal in our access to holiness and to God's service. And yet you take this beautiful ideal, this shining message for the entire world, this alternative to the world order that existed where might makes right, and how much we need this alternative today with the horrible atrocities happening in the world, how much we need to believe that this alternative exists. But then you take that and you translate that into a nation where only one tribe is working around God's home. And out of this tribe, only one family, really, only one lineage can serve as Kohanim, as the people who actually bring the sacrifice, who actually serve God. There is a gap there. And when Korach cynically speaks of this gap, when Korach cynically says, we're all holy, so I want to be number one instead of you, right? He may be using it for his own purposes, but he's evoking a true question, a true problem. How do you reconcile the shining promise of what Israel should be as a nation and the realities of religious practice in which there's an ingrained dynastic inequality that can never be bridged? You can't, out of merit, become a Kohen. It doesn't work this way. And the question stands, right? The question stands. Even though Korach and his rebellion are proven as opportunists and misguided, the question he raises is powerful and it stands. Does anybody want to ask a question, make a comment, speak to this gap, offer a way to try and live with it or not live with it? I see that people write in the comments, but I can't read it as we go. So if anybody wants to speak up, I would very much welcome you speaking
Just
up.
go on, tell us.
Okay. But seriously, if anybody wants to speak up, please feel we're people who learn.
I'm being serious.
Yeah.
We're fascinated.
Thank you. I'm just saying people who learn with me in Mayan regularly know that I very much welcome discussion and I'm extending it to everybody here.
So
One
we've
thing
already
that I noticed was that, Korach, we were all originally, a nation of priests, right? But it was only after the Egel Zahav that we lost that. So I wonder if it's kind of he's refusing to accept Hashem's, justice and, and the consequences of his own choices.
Thank you, Miriam. You're pointing to something very important, which is that between that shining ideal and the reality that we're talking about in Parashat Korach, a big thing happened. Like it wasn't just magically that ideal disappeared. After Chet HaEgel, when the people, in a sense, at the very moment of union with God, backed away from it and went back to forms of worship that they just now agreed to reject and not go back into. God said that now no longer the Bechorim, the firstborns, will serve God in the temple, but rather Shevet Levi and the Kohanim. So there's a certain historical development. And that fits into a broader theme of historical developments in Torah between God's vision and reality. Think about Gan Eden, right? God creates Gan Eden and then we sin, so reality shifts. God goes into plan B. Think about Chet HaMeraglim that you'll be reading about this week, right? There's a plan A, the same generation that went out of Egypt will then make it all the way to the promised land. And within one lifetime, within one life cycle, really live through all the experiences from the deepest slavery to the highest and most stark self-determination. And yet they reject that. They say, we want to die. We'd rather die than go. And God says, okay, so die. Fine. And it'll be the next generation. And in a sense, within that context, the shift in the ideal or the gap between the ideal and reality is not God's doing as much as it's a consequence of the people breaking faith. And in that regard, you can place Korach, as you pointed out, Miriam, you can say that maybe Korach's motivation or maybe the motivation of some of the people around him, because like I said before, it really seems as if he is much more motivated by his personal interest and desire to be the most important one. But you could say that part of the motivation is this refusal to accept, refusal to live with plan B when plan A is still hanging over your head. Is that a fair representation, Miriam, of what you said?
Oh yeah, no, I would just add though that there's a certain irony to, to saying this is all about us all wanting to be equally close to Hashem, and yet I'm not going to listen to what Hashem has to say to me.
Yeah. It echoes, by the way, in this week's Parsha, we'll be reading about the Meraglim and the Ma'apilim, right? The day after the Meraglim, basically, after God tells them, okay, fine, die in the desert. That's what you're choosing. That's what you're getting. A very strong case of the punishment fits the crime. And you're not going to make it into Israel. And then the next day, after this night of crying, of trauma, some of the people are saying, no, we got it. We understand the lesson. Now we'll do the right thing. We'll go into Israel. And she's like, no, you missed the point. The point is not Israel. The point is doing what Hashem tells you. And now Hashem told you not to go in. And yet they go in and enemies kill them because God doesn't protect them from the natural consequences of their actions. So I think that there's a certain parallel in Korach's rebellion and the Ma'apilim rebellion, definitely. To take it into a slightly more philosophical, or to try and frame it in philosophical, theological terms, when we talk about the gap between the shining vision of egalitarianism, or maybe I should say egalitarianism, but shared closeness to God, equal or shared service and closeness to God, and the reality of creating a dynasty of Kohanim who are keeping that responsibility for themselves. when we say that it is something that stems from the people's own actions, what we're saying, in other words, is that it's a compromise with the realities of life. That the shining image of everybody should serve God equally is the ideal. But in reality, the people weren't ready for this ideal. The people weren't really stepping up when they should have stepped up to the ideal. And because of that, God needs to create a compromise where they're still close to him, but they're doing it through shlichim, through representatives, which are the Kohanim. Rabbi Sachs, by the way, I'm not going to go into it in depth, but Rabbi Sachs, in his introduction to Vayikra, an article he titled The Democratization of Holiness, makes a very strong case that in some way the creation of the class of the Kohanim was actually to help the people deal with their anxieties about their relationship with God. That when Moshe went up the mountain and they all panicked, we see they're wrong to act as they did, but the motivation is coming from true distress, because until now, all their interactions with God depended on Moses being there to facilitate them. And God is, in a sense, punishing them for the sin, but also by creating a dynastic leadership that is not dependent on nevuah, on God inspiring them, but rather on procedure, where they all know what the ritual is, and the ritual can continue even if somebody dies, their child will inherit, etc., is a way to soothe this deep anxiety that the people felt on Mount Sinai, at the foot of Mount Sinai, before the golden calf sin. So in other words, if we accept this reading, but God is making peace or compromise with the people's psychological needs, the place where they are. And the ideal stays as an ideal. That's the important thing. It's not thrown by the wayside. It stays in an ideal that we should aspire to, but we need to become worthy of it. We need to work towards it. In that regard, when Korach cites this ideal here in the context of his personal struggle for power and ambition, etc., he is taking it out of the right place. The right place of this idea of Kol ha'edah kulam kedoshim is as a future aspiration. The tense of Kol ha'edah kulam kedoshim should be ihiyu, future, right? Kol ha'edah tihiyeh kedosha. Kol ha'edah iyu mamlechet kohanim. It should become, Erica Brown in a recent article in a Sapir journal called it destination postcard. It should be a destination postcard. The thing, the image that we aspire to, by picking it out of this destination postcard and turning it into a political argument today within this political reality at this particular moment, Korach is taking it out of the right time, out of the right place. Much like the sons of Korach and the gates hang outside the right time and the right place, waiting. And this is why I emphasize anticipation that the sons of Korach feel once the gates join them there, waiting for the right moment. And in that regard, what Korach is doing is he's refusing to wait for the right moment. He's refusing to put the work that will get him to the right moment. He demands it now. Now, much as the idea that comes to life in Korach's rhetoric is taken out of its right place and time, his motivation, Korach's motivation as well, perhaps if we accept the midrashic reading of why he acts as he acts, also represents a misreading of the time and place for things. For that, let us go into box number 4, to Bamidbar Rabbah, where the commentators, where the Chazal are trying to understand, why did Korach, who was a smart leader of people, not only rebel against Moshe? Obviously, he wanted more power than he had. We get that. But why did he dare? How could he dare to then go with the pan and the incense and light fire on it, or not light fire, just stand in front of the house and, he and 250 other people all stood there with pans and incense, believing, presumably, that they'll be the one chosen to be the Kohen Gadol and everybody else around them will die. Nice way to be part of a group, by the way. One of us will survive. Bye, guys. I believe it'll be me. could Korach feel so confident? That's the question the sages are trying to answer. It's one thing to agitate when there's no cost, right? It's one thing to hide in a crowd. But how dare you go and stand in front of God, knowing that if you're not the chosen one, you will die? Where do you get the chutzpah? Where do you get the confidence to believe that you can do that? So the sages have this really interesting answer. Now, since Korach was a clever man, how did he see fit to commit this folly? It is simply that his eyes misled him. He foresaw a great lineage stemming from himself, i.e. Shmuel, who was the equivalent of Moses and Aaron, as stated in Psalm 99, Moses and Aaron amongst his priests, and Samuel among those who call his name. There's a lot of midrashim about how Shmuel is in some essence a combination of the traits of Moshe and Aaron. And Korach, in some prophetic way, sees it. He sees this potential in his lineage. He sees all these people coming out of him. And he says the following, I'm skipping a little bit ahead. He said, is it possible that when this greatness is going to stem from me, I should perish? In other words, he says, there's all this potential that's going to unfold. I'm not going to die. Obviously, I'm not going to die because this potential is there and it's true. And I have prophetic sense that it's all going to come true. So how can I die? So he stands there holding his pen with the incense, completely confident because he has no doubt that he's going to survive. But he, says Chazal, did not foresee correctly, since his children would repent and those great ones would stem from them. It's an ironic moment when the sons of Korach, the same sons of Korach from the midrash we read in the beginning, they and their moment of tshuva, of this weird and decisive tshuva, they're the opening to this potential. They're the conduit through which all the greatness Korach senses in some prophetic way inside himself will unfold. So Korach is shrouding himself with this totally misplaced sense of confidence. Now, specifically, he thinks about the future, right? He thinks that he will have these children. But if you read this midrash a little more deeply, I think it offers us an insight into his psychology, into his state of mind. Because what does it mean that he's going to have these great descendants? It means that he feels that he has the potential of these descendants already in himself. That somehow he himself is already worthy of the greatness that he senses in his line. And that is a mistake. That's a misapprehension, because it's one thing to say somewhere down the line, something of mine, something of my own will evolve into greatness. It's not the same as saying, I am already great right now, right? It's not the same as saying, I am protected by some greatness inside me that makes me worthy right now. It's in a sense confusing potential and actualization. And it's once again, just a second, it's once again misunderstanding the right time and place. The greatness that he sees belongs in the future, much like the ideal of egalitarian Judaism belongs in the future. Again, it's a destination postcard. And lucky Korach, well, unlucky, but lucky, it seems, got some promise of it. He got some inkling of it. We all want to get an inkling of how our kids are going to do down the line, right? We all want to know how they will do one day. But instead of taking this inkling and aspiring to be worthy of it, he thinks the worthiness is bestowed on him in the present moment. Amy, you wanted to add something?
I wanted to say that it's so ironic that, in fact, he is the polar opposite of Moshe. Moshe is the selfless one, the humble one, and that's what God is trained. He's the selfless one, the humble one. What do we know of Moshe's children? What did they become? We really don't know. He wasn't doing this for his children. He, the head of all the people, and it was his brother and his brother's children who became the priests. Moshe was the leader, but it was totally his brother. Moshe was like totally on his face. Korach, even if he felt that, oh, well, I can't die because I have this privilege of whatever, What about the other 250 people that were with him? He certainly wasn't thinking of them because they died. And if he's thinking of himself or his children, he's just so full of himself and narcissistic, which is the polar opposite of Moshe.
Exactly. Moshe is the man who is always self-effacing. When God tells him, you are chosen, he says, send someone else. I'm not the right person. And God has to literally kind of drag him after 5 objections. God gets annoyed and says, you're going. It's not, you're just going. And God says, I will be with you. Aaron will be with you. It'll be okay. And time again, Moshe questions this choice. Korach is the one who says, I've got it all. I can do it. I can be that person. And I'm glad you pointed out, Amy, the irony of putting himself forward as a leader of men while leading all these men to disaster, because God is not going to choose all 250 of them. There's this cynicism here is really outstanding. Yes, Ellen.
Thank you. I wanted to say that maybe Erica Brown is wrong. Maybe the opposite is true. Maybe we cannot see the difference in a Cohen or a Levite because we don't have the temple now, and it's a talent that's kind of hidden, just as whatever. You see what I mean?
I understand what you're saying. So I want to clarify that Erica Brown
So
in her
not
wasn't talking
egalitarian
about
in the
this.
future.
Mm-hmm.
The opposite of egalitarian in the future. When we'll need the Kohanim.
I see what you're saying, Ellen.
Yeah.
I just want to correct myself.
Just a possibility.
I clearly wasn't clear. Erica Brown doesn't apply to the story of Korach. She just talks about the concept of destination postcards, and I really liked it, so I'm lifting it.
Yes,
for my
but the egalitarian idea is maybe wrong.
Perhaps when people lived with Beit HaMikdash, as you suggest, Ellen, it was more obvious to them what made the Kohanim and the Levim special. I have my doubts about that, honestly, just because from the stories we have in Tanakh of Kohanim and Levim, it's pretty clear that some of them were great. Some of them, like I'm thinking specifically about the sons of Eli in the beginning of Sefer Shmuel, speaking of Shmuel, are not so great. In fact, they're exploitative and cruel to the people and don't listen to God either. But one way or another, I'm not, the egalitarianism I talk about is the egalitarianism God talks about. So that's egalitarianism I'm talking about as a destination postcard, not necessarily how it will fit in the future, God willing, that we be zoche to it with the service in the Mikdash, but the basic burning idea that all of us have access to God equally. So, or all of us
Of
are,
course, yeah.
And how we
Thank you.
But thank you for your comment. Anybody else wants to add anything?
I was just trying to, it seems a little bit with Korach sort of projecting, since some descendants will be great, therefore I have some special merit or capabilities. It seems like sort of the flip of the idea of only being judged or it's of as you are now. Sort of, the story of Ishmael, not being, Ba'asher Husham, it's the opposite, in this case, he's not good now. He's not going to get the benefit of some potential future, descendants.
Yeah, that's an excellent comparison.
Pirkei Avot forbids us to want greatness. I wasn't talking about greatness, just being different because you're a Cohen. It might be different.
Joyce
like
is talking about the second part.
Or something.
Ellen, so just to clarify, we're talking about two different things. Ellen, you're talking about the idea of egalitarianism, and Joyce was talking about the midrash about Korach's motivation, that he sees greatness in his future. And with that in mind, I really like your comparison, Joyce, to Ishmael, because they're famously, I'll just repeat it so we're all on the same page. There's this famous midrash that the angels came to God and said, why are you saving Ishmael? His descendants are going to cause so much grief to the Jews, to your chosen people. And he says, okay, but I'm not judging him by something that will happen to his descendants and with his descendants in the future. I'm judging him ba'asher hu sham, which are the words used in the text. That's a pshat, ba'asher hu sham, that God sees the boy ba'asher hu sham, where he is at. And God judges Korach ba'asher hu sham. Korach, his eyes misled him, as the midrash says. He thinks that because he sees this future there, he will be judged there. And that again brings us to this image of the gates falling out of time. There's this greatness, but its proper place is in the future. It's not actualized yet. And once again, it requires work. Just like the ideal of Mamlechet Kohanim Legosh Kadosh requires work. It's not something you can use right now to demand more power or to assume you'll be safe as you demand more power. Because all those things, be they personal greatness or egalitarian holiness or some sort of a concept like that, they're things that we need to become worthy of through our work over time. They require process. And by demanding them right now, right here, Korach misunderstands something fundamental about our relationship with time and with God and with ourselves by thinking that he can skip the process and reap the fruits without doing the work. I want to bring one last example that comes in the context of Parashat Korach of this phenomena of demanding something now that would have been fine if you had worked towards it slowly, but the problem is that you demand it now. And this time, it's not something in the Parsha itself, rather something in the Haftarah. Haftarat Korach, very fittingly on several levels, is from Sefer Shmuel. So first and foremost, it's from this book that focuses on the descendants of Korach, right? On that descendant of Bnei Korach that we started our class with. So there's some beautiful poetic justice there. Furthermore, in that Haftarah, Shmuel positions himself very much in words that evoke Moshe. If in the Parsha, Moshe tells the people, or he actually doesn't tell the people, he tells God, I didn't take even one donkey from them. I didn't take one ox from them. Why are they, don't listen to them. They're saying I'm exploiting them. I never took anything for myself from them. In the Haftarah, Shmuel is the one who turns this question to the people. He tells them, did I ever exploit you? Did I ever take a chamor or shor, donkey or an ox from you? And the people acknowledge that he did it. So it's this interesting moment where the descendants of Korach is the beleaguered, is that how you pronounce it, beleaguered? I'm not sure. Beleaguered leader, much like Moshe, the man Korach rebelled against, was generations before. Just a second. And thank you. And the context specifically of the story of the Haftarah is that after a lifetime of service to the people, in which he revolutionized so many things, Shmuel didn't, unlike the Shoftim that came before him, he didn't just lead the people into victory and then it affected some sort of reform, religious reform following it. No, he first reformed the people by traveling amongst them, by bringing them closer to God, by awakening within them a desire to closeness with God. And then he used that to unite them and bring them into battle against the Philistine and save them and create some autonomy for them for the first time in a long time. So he dedicated his life to this work. And then at the end of his life, the people come to him and say they want a king. And they want a king like all the other nations. Because he's old, he's going to die. His sons are not like him. They're not following in his footsteps. So, and they're not willing to just wait for another savior like they did until now in the era of Judges. They want to have stability. They want to have a dynasty. The whole idea of egalitarianism here is totally, like, by egalitarianism, I don't mean socialism, but egalitarianism in the sense that all people should serve together is totally thrown at the wayside. They want one family to be designated to serve them as their leaders and defenders from generation to generations, like all the other nations have. In other words, you're telling Shmuel, you know, this weird existence that we have where God is our king and we need to do the right thing in order to be defended, too hard. We want to have a human defender. And Shmuel is very alarmed because he correctly understands that what it really means is that, well, God tells him that actually, that it's not you, it's me. They're not rejecting you, Shmuel, they're rejecting me, God. Because what he realized that if they have a king and the king defends them, they will stop realizing that the success of this defense still depends on their covenant with God. And only as long as they do the right thing, the covenant will hold. In other words, the existence of a king will blind them to their own responsibility for their future. In the era of the judges, they lived a very difficult life, but at least it was very clear that their behavior shapes reality, or at least it became clear every time they were punished in this way. Now that they're going to have a king, they're going to put almost a screen between them and this dependence on God, and they can easily forget it. Furthermore, Shmuel is personally offended that his leadership and his sacrifices for the people are being dismissed as passé, as your time has passed, your time is gone. And over the course of several chapters, he, following God's instructions, warns the people very strenuously about what having a king will mean, that the king will have power over them, that he can take their daughters and sons as slaves and soldiers, that he can tax them, that he can harm them. And the people keep saying, yes, that's what we want. Yes, that we accept that. This reality of life, we accept that. We want that. And then God gives them permission, says, okay, fine, let's give them a king. And he chooses Shaul. He anoints Shaul. At first, the people are not very accepting of him, but then Shaul leads the people in battle against the Ammonites, leads them to a great victory. And there's the second coronation, the second anointment that's very joyous. And it seems that the people got what they want. And it's at this point in the story, after all the chapters dealing with yes to have a king, not to have a king, which king, who is the king, do we support the king, etc., etc. It's at this point that the Haftarah comes in the big gathering after Shaul was fully embraced by the people. And oddly, Shmuel goes back to the warning tone. Instead of just letting go and celebrating the people, once again, he is adding very strong words of caution to the story. Here, let us go ahead to box number 7 and see what he says. And the background is that until now, he kind of gave him a retelling of history in which he shows how God keeps doing good things to the people and they keep betraying him and forgetting him. And then he says, well, the Lord has set a king over you. Here is the king that you have chosen, that you have asked for. If you will revere the Lord, worship him and obey him, and will not flout the Lord's command. If both you and the king who reigns over you will follow the Lord our God, well and good. But if you do not obey the Lord and you flout the God's command, the hand of the Lord will strike you as it did your fathers. Now stand by and see the marvelous thing that the Lord will do before your eyes. It is the season of the wheat harvest. I will pray to the Lord and he will send thunder and rain, very bad for the harvest. Then you will take thought and realize what a wicked thing you did in the sight of the Lord when you asked for a king. Now, I want to point out that it's a little bit of an odd rhetoric. Like he finished explaining to them that the covenant still stands, and if they and the king do the right thing, they'll be fine, and if not, then no. Okay, they got it. They got message. Why is he now causing damage to their crops to make them convinced that they did evil thing in asking for a king? Didn't we already finish this conversation? And then he, in effect, carries it out. He calls to God, and God brings rain on the harvest, and the people stood in awe of the Lord and of Shmuel, and they asked him to daven for them, and he davens for them. And then he gives them the final statement, and these are the last 2 psukim of this chapter. I'm starting in 24. Above all, you must revere the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart, and consider how grandly he has dealt with you. For if you persist in your wrongdoing, both you and your king shall be swept away. In other words, don't let the existence of the king fool you into thinking that you're no longer dependent on God. Now, we know that that's actually what happened. Shaul and the people die at the end of Shaul's reign. We know that this particular king ended in tragedy when he stopped listening to God. But let us not go that far ahead yet. In this
Rachel.
moment, just a moment,
Hmm.
in this moment, why is the sign that he's using rain in the time of harvest?
Yeah, that's what I want to say now. That Hashem is so obviously living with us, like he's saying, well, this parasha, I'm going to show them something, and it rained all week, even today.
Mhm.
I mean, he's just with us. He's sort of laughing at the parasha, not laughing at it, but, reminding us that we don't understand it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of that, both in the Parsha and in the Haftarah. There's a special emphasis on something unnatural happening, the earth
Yes.
opening in the verse in the Parsha, and the rain at the wrong time of the year, which is in fact happening in Israel right now, very bizarre, in the wrong time of the year in the Haftarah. And in both cases, the idea is to make God's presence very, very clear. That we should be aware that God is present and managing the world. Does anybody want to offer other insights into it? Why is this the particular sign that Shmuel is using? So I'll offer my version or my variation, but feel free to interject with your own. I was very puzzled by this sign for years until I noticed that there's something very poetic about it, because the problem was never that they wanted a king per se, meaning already in Deuteronomy, we don't have time to look at it now, but you can see it in the source sheet later if you want. In Deuteronomy, God tells them, or Moshe tells them rather, when you will come to the land and you will have a king that behaves in this way, as I mentioned before, doesn't take you back to Egypt, that he always has a Torah scroll with him, that he remembers a covenant, etc., etc., etc. In other words, it's already built into the system that it's okay to have a king if that's a political institution you want. The problem isn't the king. The problem isn't that that's the particular political arrangement. The problem is, why are they demanding this king now? What are the motivations in this moment? And the motivations in this moment are impure, because the motivation in this moment is they're tired of the tension of living dependent on God. So they're asking for a king right now to relieve them of this tension, which is a delusion, because they're still going to depend on God, king or no king, as Shmuel makes very clear in this speech. So the problem is not the kingship. The problem is that they're asking for it right now in this place and time. And the rain represents this very beautifully, because rain is a blessing. Rain is a great thing if it's in the right time and place. By bringing a thing that is normally a blessing into a time and place where it's a curse, Shmuel is telling them, in a sense, metaphorically, it's not the kingship that's the problem. It's why you want it right now that's the problem. You need to understand your motivations, and you need to understand that your motivations are futile, because you will remain dependent on God no matter what political institution you choose to erect for yourself. And the rest of the book of Shmuel kind of goes on and proves it through stories that show how God blesses kings who do what he wants, and doesn't bless kings who don't do what he wants, and sometimes the same king at different times, etc. Which brings us back to our running thread of this class. Once again, we talk about something that in the right time and place leads somewhere. In the right time and place can be a gate to a better future. But you take it out of this time and place, and you put it where you want it for your own reasons, for your own ambition, right now, for your own sense of security. And it's not a gate. It's a dead end. It's a mistake. Much like the gates of the midrash, sitting there in Gehenom, leading nowhere. So, and the same basic mistake, you could say psychological terms, right? The same fundamental error runs through all those cases we've seen. Once and once again, there's something that has immense potential. The idea of Kol Ha'eda Kulam Kedoshim. The promise within Korach's own line, within the people that will come out of him, and that he sees within himself. the political institution of kingship, which at a particular time and place can lead to unification and education, centralization of the knowledge of Torah, et cetera, as at the best of times it did, rarely, for a short amount of time. But all those things require work. They require being worthy. They require building something of yourself and of other people in society so that it will be the natural outcome of your work. And instead, time and time again, be it Korach or the people in the story that Shmuel tells us, they pluck it from that correct place it has in their path as a destination to work towards and demand its existence right now, as if it's their due, as if it's something they already deserved. And this attitude to life, this attitude that does away with process, that does away with work, that assumes that if something is true, then it should be true right now and be a gate that I can open and march through this instant. This attitude is an attitude that diminishes us as people, because it's an attitude that it's counter to growth. Instead of inspiring us into growth, it tells us we don't need to bother. We can have the things we want right now without having to grow ourselves into them. And perhaps that can help us understand one final metaphor that shows up in next week's Parsha in America. And that is the metaphor of the blooming staff. Because after the tragedy, after the agitation, after the earth opens its mouth and swallows Korach's household, but maybe not his sons, or maybe partially his sons, after fire comes from God and burns the 250 people who are standing there with incense, after plague comes and punishes the people for continuing to attack Moshe and Aaron even after all of that, God gives yet another answer to the basic question of, is Aaron the correct person to be the high priest? In other words, God says, okay, clearly all these disasters and calamities that I'm bringing upon the people are not enough to convince them. They're convincing them that I'm mighty, they're convincing them to be scared, but they're not answering the basic question, should Aaron be the high priest or not? And in order to answer this question in a convincing, exhaustive way, God instructs through Moshe all the heads of the tribes and Aaron to place their staffs in the tabernacle overnight, in Oel Moed overnight. And in the morning, Aaron's staff is in bloom, which of course doesn't make any sense, right? The staff is a dead piece of wood. What do you mean it overnight became bloomed, specifically almond blooms, the first tree to bloom here in Israel before any other trees bloom. And this miracle somehow convinces the people in a way that the drama of the open earth and the fire and the plague don't. This puts the whole question to rest and they move on. Not the pain, but the blooming. And I always wondered why, what has blooming to do with it? Why should the staff bloom? And there's many ways to answer it from different angles. For our purposes today, I want to tie it all together by relating it to the question of growth. What Korach missed and what the people in the era of Shmuel missed is the necessity of process, is a necessity of time. They see a gate, they want to walk through it now. They don't see that you first need to climb the hill and reach the gate. And then at the right time, it will open up for you naturally and bring you into a place of redemption. They want a gate open now. And with a metaphor of growth, with a metaphor of blooming, of something coming into season and being ready to bring new life into the world, which is what flowers do, God is in a sense offering them in minor key. It's not as dramatic as the open earth and the plague, but in minor key, God is offering them the right path. It's not enough to punish. It's not enough to tell them all you did until now was wrong. He's also telling them quietly what the right path is. And in that, he's also telling all of us what the right path is. And the right path is the right of growth. And this is why, Mark, when you spoke about your mother's dedication to ongoing learning as she was growing older in life, I thought it was so appropriate for this, because this is what it's about. It's about always growing, always blooming, always trying to make ourselves worthy of reaching the shiny gates that we can't break through. We can't. It leads nowhere if we didn't earn our place by them. And on that note, thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Thank you for this opportunity to learn together. And may we earn good gates to open in our lives privately and collectively. And may the neshama of your mother mark heaven, Aliyah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Rachel.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much to the Chernans for making this possible. Thank you to
Thank you,
Rachel for a
Mark.
wonderful class. And
Thank you,
have
Mark,
a-
Naomi. Thank you, Rachel. Sure.
Thank you.
Amen.
All around. All around. Excellent.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.